From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
It's 29 days from the midterm election, and control of the Senate is still balanced on a knife's edge. What's the state of play in those crucial Senate races, and what are both sides doing to come out on top this November? Welcome to Potomac Watch. I'm Kim Strassel, and I am here with two of my amazing colleagues, Mene Ukwaburue and Kate Batchelder-Odell, both brimming with insights about the Senate race for power. And it's a close one. On the face of it, this should be a straightforward task for the GOP. They need to capture just one additional seat to take control, and voters are very angry about the direction of the country. Later this week, we'll in fact be getting the latest round of inflation numbers, which are likely to show some price pain still to come. But Republicans are defending seats in a number of races that are proving very tight, including Pennsylvania and Ohio. And meanwhile, the candidates they chose to take on sitting Democrats are in a number of places having real trouble resonating with the public, in particular in Georgia, Arizona, and New Hampshire. But before we get to that, let's just start with the races where the GOP does seem to be on pretty sound footing. I'll run through those. Florida, that's where Democrats went in very hopeful with their Senate candidate, Val Demings. She's a House member, a former police chief, taking on Senator Marco Rubio. The last two polls have shown Rubio with a lead of 6 and 7 points, respectively. Florida's really trended more red in recent years, and Governor Ron DeSantis is also showing similar strength in his polls. So I'd say that barring something big and what could be bigger than the recent hurricane those Republican leaders weathered, this seems to be a pretty safe GOP seat. I'd also put in that category Missouri, where Senator Roy Blunt is retiring. This is an open seat, and things were looking a little dicey for Republicans when it seemed as if the former Missouri Governor Eric Greitens, a very flawed candidate, had a shot at the nomination. Instead, in August, the state attorney general Eric Schmitt won, and he's walking away with it, currently up in the Real Clear Average politics by 11 points. Kate, a few other states that seem to be looking more comfortable for Republicans right now. One I'd mentioned is North Carolina, where Republican House member Ted Booth is running against former state Supreme Court Chief Justice Sherry Beasley. The RCP average only has him up by about 1.5 points, but Booth's been ahead in every single poll since spring, save two, and one of those was done by a liberal pollster firm. Democrats also haven't won a Senate seat in North Carolina since 2008, so that I think is pretty good. The other one, a little more interesting, is Wisconsin, where Ron Johnson is running for re-election, and he looked to be in real trouble this summer against Democratic challenger Mandela Barnes, but basically since the middle of September, he seems to be pulling up. The Real Clear Politics average now has him up nearly 3 points. Kate, tell me if I'm wrong about these races. Am I overstating the case? And what in particular should we be watching for when Johnson and Barnes have their second debate this week?
Well, Kim, I think that's a great opening summary. I mean, in Wisconsin, we have seen Ron Johnson sort of come back here from a little bit of a deficit. He has been hitting the state lieutenant governor Barnes with ads on basically being soft on crime, which I think have been very effective. Barnes has basically been featured in some of these academic discussions about defunding the police, and Johnson has cut ads of those that I think have been very effective. So there's one where Barnes says that something to the effect of, I'm paraphrasing here, that reducing prison populations has become sexy. He's clearly talking about how criminal justice reform is now a popular issue, but he does it in this way that is just so divorced from the reality of what I think people are really seeing, which is that people are getting out without bail, and all of these reforms have not been effective in keeping dangerous people off the streets. So I think that issue has just been really working for Ron Johnson, in addition to just some of the larger economic headwinds that I can't see Barnes being able to overcome with inflation stays as ferocious as it is right now. Voters are just going to be really motivated by those pocketbook issues, even if Barnes tries to make the campaign about something else.
Yeah, it's interesting. Barnes, like many Democratic candidates, seems to be pegging a lot of his campaign on abortion. And that's why I find this race interesting, because at least in Wisconsin, it would seem as though that is still not necessarily outranking voter concerns about kind of day-to-day issues like pocketbook issues or like crime. Mene, this kind of then moves us into that category of races that I think are much more toss-ups. And one really big one, an interesting one, is in Pennsylvania, where Mehmet Oz, the Republican challenger, and this is an open seat, by the way, defending the seat of retiring Senator Pat Toomey. But Oz seems to slowly but surely be closing the gap with Pennsylvania Lieutenant Governor John Fetterman. It's now under 4 points on RCP, but it happened double digits not even that long ago. So what's going on here, and how possible is it that the GOP might maybe hold on to this seat?
Well, you're right to point out that the race in Pennsylvania is narrowing. Oz has managed to close the gap by quite a lot in just the past month or so. Part of that comes from an increased ad spend from basically the Republican Party fundraising apparatus. I think that there was a lot of unsureness about what kind of candidate Oz would be. Obviously, he's never held office before. He's known as a TV celebrity. And also, he was able to secure the nomination in large part because of President Trump's endorsement. And so I think a lot of people from the sort of establishment wing that has a lot of control over where the money goes were a little bit wary about over-investing in that race before they knew that Oz could prove himself. But on the campaign trail, he seems to have embraced pretty conventional Republican Party priorities. Seems as if he'd go to Washington and be a vote for generally low taxes and the other sort of basic priorities that the party is trying to push today. And so I think people have finally circled the wagons and have been supporting him a lot more. And I think that there's a corresponding beginning of doubts about John Fetterman, who's the Democratic nominee. Not only did he have a stroke recently and has had to cut back on his publicity and has showed a little bit of a lack of facility with language, frankly, on the campaign trail, but I think people are digging more and more into his record and are uncomfortable with some of the things that they see in his background. I think it's helpful that Kate mentioned abortion and crime as being some of the two issues, because crime has worked for Oz trying to hammer Fetterman's record in the same way that it's worked for Ron Johnson against Mandela Barnes. Fetterman previously had said that he thought they could reduce the prison population by as much of a third without having any impact on crime, and I think that that's something that Pennsylvanians are very wary of. Obviously, Philadelphia, which is the highest population center in the state, is a city that has really struggled with a crime problem, and so people don't want to have another vote and another voice in Washington going there to basically advocate for soft on crime policies. But generally, Pennsylvania is basically, the race is structured by the same issues of crime and abortion that seem to be the two hottest ones nationwide as we go down the stretch here.
Yeah, it couldn't have helped Fetterman either. Last week, the Associated Press, and frankly, I was a bit surprised that they wrote this story. They wrote a brutal story about Fetterman and his absenteeism, how often he missed meetings when he was the mayor of Braddock in Pennsylvania and as lieutenant governor, which I think is fed into this narrative that maybe he's not fit for office. It's an interesting timing that the AP decided to do that. This brings us to the other big open seat that the Republicans have to defend, Ohio, where the candidates will have their very first debate tonight. This is where Rob Portman is retiring, and the GOP ought to be walking away with this. Ohio hasn't really been a swing state in some time, but the GOP candidate is J.D. Vance, a guy who's proven very controversial, also somewhat unlikable, versus a very gifted Democratic candidate, House member Tim Ryan, who has been very good at presenting himself as a centrist. I guess we'll see in the debate tonight whether he really is. Polls have been all over the place. They're currently showing Vance with a slight lead on the average. This is going to be a slugfest to the very end, and notably, this race had more spending than just about any other in the country. Like Wisconsin, Vance is pounding away at crime, as you guys were saying, drug abuse, hitting Ryan in the Democratic Party for the defund the police movement. We'll see what Ryan tonight has to say in response. This then, Kate, brings us on to some of the places that Republicans are hoping to maybe win one of those seats if they can hold on to these other ones. And it's a little tough, but one of their top picks, whenever I talk to GOP strategists, the seat that makes them most optimistic is Nevada. This is where incumbent Catherine Cortez Masto, she's being challenged by Adam Laxalt, the former Nevada Attorney General, big family name. Trump was just out there this weekend. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
You're going to defeat your extreme left-wing senator, not respected at all in Washington, D.C. Catherine Cortez Masto hasn't done a thing on the border. Hasn't done a thing. You're going to send Joe Lombardo to the governor's mansion. And you're going to send Adam Laxalt to the U.S. Senate. And you're going to elect an incredible slate of true America First Republicans up and down the ballot.
Well, Kate, Trump is certainly pretty optimistic about all that. You heard him mention the border. It sounds like that is a big issue out there. What else is going on in Nevada, and how is Adam Laxalt managing to stay ahead in the polls?
Yeah, Kim, I mean, Laxalt is in striking distance in most of the polls that we see, ahead in a few even. I was out covering the first time that Cortez Masto ran for Senate in 2016 against Joe Heck. She was handpicked by Harry Reid, and Joe Heck was a good candidate, but had some issues handling Trump, and it was a difficult year for him in 2016. So I think should be a really competitive seat for Laxalt, because Cortez Masto is not particularly substantive on any number of issues, but she's running big on abortion right now. A lot of, like we've been talking about, a lot of Democrats are really betting the farm on abortion, and it's a risky play. I mean, Kim, AAA keeps tabs on gas prices across the country. Average price of gas in Nevada today is $5.44. And a month ago it was $4.87, and a year ago it was $3.87. So I think you're going to see issues like that really animating voters to go with somebody else besides Cortez Masto, and so it should be a good opportunity for Laxalt. Laxalt is also running a pretty disciplined campaign and is focusing on those pocketbook issues like inflation. He said that he wouldn't support a national abortion bill and that he's in favor of states deciding the issue. He's trying to diffuse that a little bit and focus on the core economic issues. And to your point, he's got name identification in the state. And the state, while it has been trending Democratic in recent cycles, Harry Reid ran on a slogan. His first slogan was independent like Nevada. So voters in Nevada do defy normal political categories. So I do think it really is perhaps the most promising Republican pickup on the map.